Are you sure you want to board this flight? They don't know who you are." The woman's voice on the other end of the line was barely a whisper, but in his ear it rang like a final warning. The man responded with a slow, steady breath. "That's exactly why I must go." That day, Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport was packed. Suitcases rolled briskly across the cold stone floors. Boarding announcements echoed rhythmically from the ceiling speakers. People rushed by, busy, distracted, indifferent. Among them, one man moved quietly through the security checkpoint. He wore a faded gray khaki jacket and a low-brimmed baseball cap that hid nearly half his face. No one gave him a second glance. No one knew who he was, and that was precisely how he wanted it. Elijah Ford. A name once ranked among Washington's most powerful. A man who had held positions never to be listed on any official resume. A man who had spoken face-to-face with presidents, who had once turned a looming global crisis into a footnote in the papers. But today he was just E.F. Walker, passenger on Flight 918, from Dallas to San Diego, Seat 2A, business class. No one paid him any attention as he boarded the plane. A few eyes glanced his way and then moved on. In the world of commercial aviation, an older black man dressed modestly, traveling alone, not making a fuss. He wasn't someone who drew much notice. Elijah settled into Seat 2A by the window. The seat was wide, cushioned, with the curtain half drawn and the late afternoon light casting a soft amber glow through the cabin. He unstrapped a small canvas bag slung across his shoulder and placed it beneath his seat, then quietly removed his gloves. His hands were slender but firm, the joints slightly swollen, traces of years spent under intense pressure and heavy burdens. Not long after, a tall blonde flight attendant approached. Her name was Amanda Blake, chief stewardess of the business class cabin. Her smile was impeccably professional, but her eyes were not. "Welcome aboard, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Elijah didn't respond immediately. He looked at her for a few seconds, then slowly reached into his coat pocket and held up his phone, displaying the digital boarding pass. Amanda leaned in to look. Name, E.F. Walker. Seat, 2A. Ticket, verified. She paused just half a second. Too short for the average person to notice, but not for Elijah's sharp eyes. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice low and calm. "No, sir. Just verifying," she replied, then turned away. But Elijah could hear her heels striking the floor faster than they had on the way over. A young man in a tailored Brooks Brothers suit entered shortly afterward, pulling a sleek carry-on and wearing wireless earbuds. His eyes swept the cabin as if looking for a familiar seat. When he saw Elijah in 2A, he froze. "This is business class, man," he muttered, frowning, making no effort to lower his voice. Elijah looked up, met his eyes directly, then turned calmly back to the window. Not a single word. The younger man sneered, muttering something about priority limits, then slumped into Seat 2B, right beside Elijah. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, flight attendant Lana, a young woman just 2 years into the job, was scrolling through the passenger manifest on her tablet. When her eyes stopped at the name E.F. Walker, her pupils dilated slightly. She tapped the screen, opened the detailed profile, and then hurriedly pulled back the curtain dividing the cabins, rushing into the crew lounge. "Amanda!" Amanda Blake looked up from her clipboard. "What's going on?" "Do you know who's in 2A? Some quiet older black man." "Why?" Lana lowered her voice. "I've seen that name before, in the emergency protocols from the Transportation Security Administration. E.F. isn't his real name. He used to be part of a covert agency, and if I'm not mistaken," she glanced toward the front of the cabin, "he once held a federal clearance code. There was even a president's signature next to it." Back in Seat 2A, Elijah sat quietly. The afternoon light washed gently over his cheek, casting a soft shadow across his face. From the outside, he looked like nothing more than a lonely old man, gazing at the sky. But inside him a current of memory surged, an unpublished report, a figure about to exit the underworld, and a flight on which everything was being tested, including him. As the plane slowly rolled toward the runway, the business class cabin seemed calm on the surface, but beneath that stillness, unseen currents were beginning to stir. Elijah Ford, or more precisely E.F. Walker, sat upright, his fingers loosely interlaced across his lap. The passengers around him were sipping wine, tapping their touchscreens, or dozing with their eyes shut. But not Elijah. He was calculating, observing, sensing. The hum of the aircraft's wheels beneath them beat a steady rhythm, a subtle reminder. In the galley behind the business class cabin, Lana, the young flight attendant, had just returned from a brief, tense exchange with Chief Attendant Amanda Blake. Her face had gone pale. Amanda looked tense but maintained the polished smile of professionalism. In her years working for the airline, she had learned to read people through their eyes, and the man in seat 2A was unlike anyone she'd ever met. "You don't know who he is," Lana whispered. "I only know one thing," Amanda replied. "He's pretending to be an ordinary man. And people like that are never ordinary." 10 minutes after takeoff, something unexpected happened. A passenger in business class, the same young man who had scoffed at Elijah earlier, suddenly pulled out his phone, turned toward Elijah, and began live streaming. "Y'all look at this. Some old dude just snuck into business class. He ain't dressed for it, ain't acting like he belongs, and nobody is saying anything. Ain't that funny?" His voice was loud and clear. The live stream was public. Several passengers turned to look. Amanda quickly stepped in. "Sir, I must ask you to stop recording other passengers. It's against flight policy." "Why? I'm just documenting the downgrade of business class, that's all." The man smirked, keeping the camera pointed at Elijah. Elijah said nothing, but he raised his head and looked directly into the lens, his gaze cold, deep, and unwavering. The man's hand faltered. He hesitated. The live stream ended. An older passenger across the aisle cleared his throat. "Young man, if that gentleman wants to sit there quietly, let him. It's not your business." A silent thank you flickered in a few glances. But this was only the beginning. About 30 minutes into the flight, the aircraft's overhead lights flickered strangely. A soft ping came from the cockpit. Amanda was summoned immediately. Inside the flight deck, the captain, a serious-looking man in his 50s, was holding a printed bulletin from the onboard interfax. His face was tight with concern. "Amanda, this is a security alert from TSA's interagency network." She skimmed the sheet and froze. "Flight 918 currently carries a passenger matching a federal encrypted profile. Name, Elijah Ford, alias E.F. Walker. Status, not dangerous. Security clearance, top secret. Directive, do not interfere. Do not question. Do not disrupt. Observe from a distance. Any uncontrolled action will be considered a federal violation." Amanda stiffened. "So, he's—" "No one knows exactly who he is now," the captain replied. "All we know is, don't do anything stupid." Back in the business class cabin, Amanda exhaled, straightened her uniform, and walked out as if nothing had happened. But Lana, who had been tracking the situation from the start, couldn't hide her unease. "He was once on the Department of Defense's roster, Amanda. Why is he here on a commercial flight? Why is he traveling alone and in silence?" Amanda answered quietly. "Maybe. For reasons we're not meant to know yet." At that moment, Elijah opened the small canvas bag beneath his seat. He didn't take anything out. He simply lifted it, then gently placed it back down, as if checking whether the contents were still intact. His eyes swept the cabin but didn't settle on anyone. For a fleeting second, Lana held her breath. She couldn't explain the feeling. It was part fear, part curiosity, and part reverence. A few minutes later, the aircraft's PA system came alive with the captain's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, due to atmospheric conditions, we'll be adjusting our course 5 degrees to the south. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened. But in aviation circles, a 5-degree course change is never just due to weather. It was a discreet signal. Something unusual was unfolding. Above the southern skies of Texas, the Boeing 737 continued its smooth flight. But inside the canvas bag at Elijah's feet, there were no documents, no money, no personal items. There was a military-grade encrypted device, compact, heavy, and secured by a biometric lock. And that device had just begun to vibrate, gently but persistently. A subtle warning. Time was running out. This flight was no ordinary journey. And Elijah, a man no longer listed on any official register, was holding in his hand something powerful enough to reshape an entire system. The sky outside the window had deepened to a dark indigo. Twilight had passed as if it had never existed. Flight 918 glided quietly through the upper layers of the atmosphere, its engines humming like a slow, measured breath. But in the business class cabin, the man in seat 2A had yet to close his eyes, not even once. Elijah Ford, or E.F. Walker, as his boarding pass read, sat upright, hands resting lightly in front of his stomach. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching a movie. He wasn't sleeping. He simply stared straight ahead into the dim space before him, as though waiting for a signal, a gaze, or a memory to resurface from the hardened recesses of his mind. In the rear cabin, Lana stood silently near the galley door, tray in hand, though there was no one left to serve. She glanced toward the business class rows, then lowered her head again. In her mind, the image of that silent old man repeated like a wordless background score. Why was he here? Why was he traveling alone? No escort, no security detail. And why? Was he carrying a device that only individuals with Level 9 command clearance were authorized to access? She didn't know. But her instincts told her this man was no longer part of this world, at least not in any ordinary way. In the front of the plane, Amanda Blake was scribbling something onto her clipboard. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from pressure. She had handled worse before: drunken passengers, sick children mid-flight, mechanical turbulence, but never had she received a top-secret alert about a passenger mid-air. She stared at the name E.F. Walker, feeling blank. On the manifest, he was entirely unremarkable. No title, no unusual flight history, no checked baggage. Yet what she had just read was enough to make the entire flight crew rethink how they were handling this flight. Elijah shifted in his seat and retrieved a small cloth square from his coat pocket, folded carefully, aged and nearly worn through. He unfolded it gently. Inside was a photograph, a time-worn photo, corners curled. It showed 3 people, a woman with curly hair, a boy around 7, and a younger man who looked a lot like Elijah, though younger. But the eyes were unmistakable. It was his family, taken 25 years ago. Elijah stared at the picture, his eyes narrowing slightly. A quiet exhale escaped his lips. No one saw it. No one heard it. But it was the first moment he broke his posture of stillness. A ding sounded, a signal from the device. He leaned down, gently removing the object from its cloth sheath inside the canvas bag. It was a small black metal unit. No buttons, no lights. Only a single circular indentation in the center. A fingerprint reader. Elijah pressed his thumb against it. A faint click sounded. A micro display flickered to life within the core. A single string of code appeared. Emergency transmission code 919ZR. Preparing to extract archived data. Time remaining 1 hour 12 minutes. He closed his eyes. Just as he'd predicted. The device had auto-activated upon reaching a specific safe altitude, which also meant time was running out. In the back of the cabin, Lana quietly stepped toward business class. She didn't look directly at Elijah, only stopped 3 rows back, hands clenched nervously. Then, as though some invisible force nudged her forward, she took one more step and spoke. "Would you like some water, sir?" Elijah looked up. His eyes met hers. And in that fleeting moment, Lana felt exposed, as though his gaze could peel back every layer of her thoughts. "You're the only one who's dared to look at me that long on this flight," he said slowly. "And I believe you're the only one who realizes I'm not Walker." Lana froze. Elijah looked away, back out the window. "I don't need water, but thank you." Amanda had been watching from afar. Her expression hardened. She picked up the internal phone and called the cockpit. "You know," she said, "I'm not sure what exactly he's carrying. But if that device begins transmitting, all cabin data could be harvested and wiped." The captain's voice came back through the secured line. "TSA's orders are clear. Observe. Do not interfere." "And if he's not Elijah Ford? Then we've already stepped into a game none of us has the authority to exit." Elijah placed the family photo back into his coat pocket, gently, reverently. He closed his eyes for the first time since boarding the plane, not to sleep, but to remember. To remember the voice of a wife long gone, to remember the questions that had never been answered, and to remember that today's flight. It wasn't just a journey home. It was the last time he would allow himself to stay silent, because of the truth he carried. Wouldn't just expose a single airline. It would force a nation to confront what it had buried for nearly 2 decades. The Boeing 737 soared above the 9th cloud layer, its engines steady, but inside the business class cabin the illusion of calm had begun to crack. In seat 2A, Elijah Ford had just completed biometric verification. The device in his lap lit up with a soft amber glow. He sat upright, eyes fixed on the stream of text unfolding silently on the screen, lines only someone on the inside could understand the weight of. Retrieve. Sensitive data package 5. A leak risk. Critical data extraction. Must initiate within 45 minutes. No sirens. But Elijah knew the stakes. If he didn't transmit the data within the next 45 minutes, the encryption system would self-destruct, erasing everything permanently. In the cockpit, the captain received a personal call from TSA's highest level, a call that would never appear in the flight's recorded logs. "We're aware Ford is on your flight." "Yes." "You don't need to intervene, just ensure no one else approaches him. Anyone who tries, even flight crew, will be treated as interfering with federal intelligence." "What's he carrying?" "A data package encrypted at the policy level from the Bush administration. No one is authorized to touch it, except him. And more importantly," the voice hesitated, "what's inside could reopen a national investigation that's been buried for 17 years. Back in the business class cabin, all seemed still. But what no one realized, the aircraft's entire Wi-Fi system had just been disabled by silent command from ground control. No warning, no announcement. The young man who had once live-streamed glanced at his phone, frowning. No signal, no Wi-Fi. He couldn't even load a map. "What the hell?" Frustrated, he stood and walked toward the restroom. But as he passed seat 2A, a soft click echoed, the sound of a seatbelt locking in place. "You shouldn't walk around right now." Elijah's voice was calm, not loud, not stern, but it landed like a hand pressed to the man's shoulder. "It's just the bathroom, man." "Then use the one in the back. Trust me." Elijah never turned his head, but something in his presence made the younger man obey without another word. At that moment, Lana felt it. Something was off. A current is running beneath the surface of this flight. Avoided glances, unspoken instructions, phone calls that named no names. She stepped back into the galley where Amanda stood still, not preparing meals, not even pretending to. "What are you hiding?" Lana asked. Amanda didn't turn. "Some things, once you know them, there's no going back." "Then tell me. I don't want to be a blind steward anymore." This time Amanda turned. Her eyes were red but steady. The data he's carrying could expose the entire CIA personnel erasure program from 2006. Lana's breath caught. "What program?" "The wipeout list. Double agents. Witnesses no longer necessary." Amanda gripped the metal edge of the cart tightly. "It includes names of people once used by the U.S. government for black ops, then erased like they never existed." Elijah knew time was closing in. No messages had come, no signals from outside, but he knew. They were waiting. Waiting for him to send the data. Or die with it. He toggled the device to temporary activation mode, an option that allowed a partial data release. Enough to cause immediate impact, but not the full detonation. A voice played in the earpiece hidden in his right ear. "Elijah, if you're hearing this, I'm already dead." It was a woman's voice. Low, southern, familiar. "I'm Elizabeth Tran. The parallel agent was erased in 2008. You once told me, we don't keep secrets, we keep lives. But I'm not alive anymore, so keep the secret and let it live." Elijah froze. His hand trembled. Elizabeth. She was one of the ones he swore to protect. Someone owed a promise to get her out of the shadows of war. He had broken that promise. Amanda approached Seat 2A quickly. Elijah looked up. "I don't need your questions." "I'm not asking." She stopped exactly 3 paces away. "I just need to know, if you send that data, what happens to this flight?" Elijah looked at her for a long moment. "It lands normally." "And you?" "Not sure." Elijah pressed the transmit button on the device. It lit up for 3 seconds, then went dark. At that exact moment, far below the clouds over California, a secure government data center received an urgent transmission marked Operation Mirror, Dust, Files Declassified. Simultaneously, the TSA's internal communication systems began to blink with alarms. A file had just been opened, without clearance. Elijah closed his eyes. He knew he'd lit a fire no one could put out. There was no stepping back, and the man in Seat 2A had stepped out of the shadows for the last time. Not to survive, but to ensure history would remember his name. Immediately after the first data package was transmitted, the tiny device in Elijah's palm went dark and returned to standby mode. No sound, no alert, but he knew the storm had begun. On the ground, deep beneath an unmarked facility near Washington, D.C., government cybersecurity experts were swarming like ants out of a hive. A large screen flashed a single phrase: "Mirror dust active." None of them knew exactly what mirror dust was. They only had strict orders. If it activates, no one touches it, no one removes it, no one traces the source. It's not the strongest who brings the truth to light, but the one willing to carry it, even when no one believes. Amanda turned to Lana, the young flight attendant standing silently nearby, her eyes clouded with conflict. "I need your help." Amanda's voice was barely above a whisper. "Me? I'm just a flight attendant. I don't know." Amanda cut her off. You're a witness, and sometimes that's the only thing that keeps history from being buried. In Seat 4C, journalist Miriam Joss reopened her laptop. She had just finished recording her conversation with Elijah, saved it as 2 files. One she encrypted and sent to the Chronicle's satellite server. The other, she copied by hand onto paper. Because when networks go down, paper still lives. Ding! The seatbelt signal chimed again. The captain's voice returned. Ladies and gentlemen, due to technical issues, we will be making an emergency landing at El Paso Military Base. Please remain in your seats until directed by the crew. But everyone near Seat 2A knew. This wasn't about technical issues. On the ground, a lightly armed special ops unit stood ready. No insignias, no greetings, no welcome signs, only cold eyes and one directive. Locate and detain the individual holding code name Mirror Dust. Back on the plane, Amanda bent down and opened a small cabinet beneath the tea tray. From it, she pulled a thin cloth pouch. Inside, the encryption device Elijah once held. He had tucked it away quietly. Just before giving her the final code. We can't let them get this. She turned to Lana. You're the only one they won't search immediately. They're watching me, watching Seat 2A, watching anyone who looks like they're hiding something. I'm scared, Lana admitted. So am I, Amanda said, gripping her hand. But this is the moment we find out who you are. The cabin light shifted to a warm orange-red. The final cue that landing was moments away. Time was running out. Elijah stood. Every passenger turned as if drawn by gravity itself. He said nothing. No farewell. Just walked, slowly, deliberately, toward the rear lavatory where crew members typically rested. Amanda and Lana felt their hearts tighten. He wasn't carrying the device. He wasn't holding the code. But he was heading straight for the place they'd search first. He was becoming the decoy. The plane touched down. A small jolt. No applause, as is sometimes heard after long flights. Just eyes watching the door, waiting to see who would step through. Then the door opened. 3 men in black military uniforms entered. No introductions, no passenger manifest, no questions. They marched directly to Seat 2A. Empty. One turned, his voice cold. Where is he? Just then Elijah stepped out from the rear. I'm here. You'll come with us. Elijah nodded, walked slowly with the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. But just as they reached the front, Miriam stood. I'm a journalist. I've recorded everything. One of the agents glanced at her, almost amused. Good. But we're not here for the ones who write stories. Amanda and Lana watched as Elijah was escorted away. The young woman bit her lip, fighting back tears. Amanda exhaled a long, quiet breath, and in her heart a silent vow. We won't let him disappear like all the others. As passengers were gradually escorted off the aircraft, no phones were allowed, no cameras permitted. Airport security blanketed the area, but at the far end of the cabin, Lana quietly stepped out, cradling a tray of tea. Beneath it, the encryption device and the final code. No one stopped her. No one searched her. She was just a flight attendant. If you've read this far and your heart is tight like those still on board, leave a comment. What do you think will happen to Elijah? And if you believe truth should never stay buried, share this story. Because sometimes the right story at the right time, it can change a generation. In the back of the military vehicle rolling away from the base, Elijah sat in the last row. His hands weren't cuffed, but he knew where he was going. There would be no return. And yet he also knew. The truth was no longer in his hands. It was being carried by someone no one suspected, Lana. The girl who once only brewed tea smiled politely and stayed silent. And now that silence was screaming louder than ever with every step she took. The Boeing 737 tilted its wings as it began its descent. The skies outside were no longer blue. Below, the civilian airport had vanished from the navigational radar. In its place, the military lights of El Paso Air Base. Lana had just finished preparing a cup of hot tea. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried the tray past the rows of business-class seats. Her mind was racing. She had seen hundreds of passengers, executives, celebrities, even politicians, but no one had ever made her feel this way. Fear, curiosity, reverence. She didn't know if the man in seat 2A was a spy, a defector, or a traitor. But one thing was certain. He wasn't just carrying the data. Elijah was the data, a living archive. In the galley, Amanda Blake stepped aside and pulled her phone from her uniform pocket. No signal, but she didn't need a connection. She opened her photo library, scrolling until she reached an old image. A man in an Air Force uniform, smiling proudly in the sunlight. Her father. Missing since 2007. Before his disappearance, he had mentioned someone. The man sent to advise on strategic security. No one knew his real name, just his code, E. Ford. She looked back toward the cabin. Could it be him? And if it was, had her father died because someone ordered his name erased? Elsewhere in business class, a woman in her 50s typed quietly on a laptop resting neatly on her tray table. She wore a soft blue cardigan and a small brooch shaped like a winged bird. No one paid attention to her, and that was exactly how she liked it. Her name was Miriam Joss, investigative journalist for Chronicle National. A specialist in tracking people erased from public records. She wasn't on this flight by chance. She had received an anonymous tip from the Pentagon. Flight 918. Seat 2A. When he acts, America will have to choose between truth and reputation. Be there. In 30 years of reporting, Miriam had never felt her hands shake while typing, until now. In 2A, Elijah opened his eyes. He felt something in the air, footsteps, soft but deliberate, approaching. And he wasn't wrong. The woman in seat 4C, Miriam, stepped forward. Her expression was calmer than most interrogators Elijah had faced in his 4 decades of service. "I'm not here to stop you," she said. No greetings, no pleasantries. Elijah looked straight at her. "But you know who I am. I know you were the man who buried scandals before they made the front page. I know you disappeared from the system in 2008. And I know today you chose not to stay silent." Elijah didn't respond. Only silence. Miriam continued, her voice low and steady. "I don't need you to reveal any secrets. I just need you to confirm one thing." Elijah nodded gently, agreeing to listen. "Is it true that mirror dust contains proof that the government signed internal kill orders during Operation Shadowlight?" The cabin seemed still. Elijah looked at her for a long moment, then answered, "It doesn't just prove it. It contains the original signatures." Just then, a soft ping sounded through the cabin. Heads turned. The captain's voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've just received updated instructions from ground control. Due to a technical issue, we will be redirected to land at the El Paso military base in approximately 25 minutes. Please remain calm and follow the guidance of the flight crew." Elijah closed his eyes. A faint smile crossed his lips. "They know I've sent the first piece." Amanda stood from her seat, quickly moving toward 2A. "They're going to detain you before you can transmit the rest." Elijah said nothing, but in his eyes she found the answer. And the remaining data? Elijah reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. He handed it to her. Amanda unfolded it. On it was a time code, a string of characters, and one final line. If I don't send part 2, give this code to someone who knows what to do. The plane began descending. The sky outside turned from blue to a tense gray. Below, El Paso Air Force Base lit up in emergency protocol. In the cabin, Miriam typed her final lines. Amanda clenched the paper in her fist. Lana stood motionless, caught between fear and awe. And Elijah, the man in seat 2A, had only one code left. One final truth not yet unleashed. If it fell into government hands, it would be erased. But if it got out, the world would never be the same. The Boeing 737 tilted gently, beginning its descent. The skies outside were no longer clear. Below, the civilian airport had disappeared from the navigation radar. In its place, the blinking military lights of El Paso Air Base flickered, a silent warning. This was no longer a commercial flight. Inside the cabin, an eerie silence settled. Passengers who had once been busy with laptops, films, or wine now simply looked at one another, and the man in seat 2A, Elijah Ford, sat like a statue. No reaction, no fear. But something had changed. He no longer held the encryption device in his hand. In the galley, Amanda clutched the small piece of paper Elijah had given her. The final code. His handwriting was still fresh, the ink slightly scented. But one thing had changed. He no longer held the encrypted device in his hand. In the galley, Amanda gripped the slip of paper he had given her. The final code. His handwriting still carried the scent of fresh ink. It's not the strongest who brings the truth out, but the one who's willing to carry it, even when no one believes. Amanda looked over at Lana. The young woman stood still, her eyes unsure, flickering like a candle in the wind. I need your help, Amanda said softly. Me? I'm just a flight attendant. I don't... No. You're a witness, Amanda cut her off. And sometimes a witness is the only thing that keeps history from being buried. In seat 4C, journalist Miriam Joss opened her laptop again. She had just finished recording her entire conversation with Elijah, saving it in 2 forms. One file she encrypted and transmitted to the Chronicle server via a private satellite link. The other, she transcribed by hand. Because when networks fail, paper survives. Ding! The seatbelt sign lit up. The captain's voice returned. As a reminder, due to technical issues, we will be making an emergency landing at El Paso Military Base. Please remain seated until further instructions from the flight crew. But those near seat 2A knew this wasn't technical. On the tarmac, a lightly armed tactical unit stood waiting. No insignias, no greetings, no placards, only cold stares and one silent directive. Locate and secure the individual carrying the mirror dust code. Aboard the aircraft, Amanda suddenly bent down and opened the small cabinet beneath the tea station. She pulled out a thin fabric pouch. Inside it was the encryption device Elijah had once held. He had hidden it inside the water tray, just before handing her the final code. They cannot get their hands on this. Amanda turned to Lana. You're the only one they won't search right away. They're watching me, seat 2A. Anyone who looks like they're hiding something. I'm scared, Lana confessed. So am I, Amanda said, gripping her hand tightly. But this is the moment you decide who you are. In the cabin, the lighting turned amber red, the final signal. Landing was imminent. Time was running out. Elijah rose to his feet. Every passenger turned as if pulled by a silent gravity. He said nothing, didn't wave, just walked. slowly, steadily, toward the rear lavatory where the flight attendants usually took their breaks. Amanda and Lana felt pressure in their chests. He wasn't carrying the device. He wasn't holding the code. But he was walking toward the very spot that would be searched first. He was making himself the bait. The plane touched down. A soft jolt. No applause. Only eyes locked on the cabin door, waiting to see who would enter first. And then the door burst open. 3 men in black military uniforms stepped in. No greetings. No checking passenger lists. No hesitation. They marched directly to seat 2A. Empty. One agent turned, voice like ice. "Where is he?" From the back of the plane, Elijah stepped forward. "I'm here. Come with us." Elijah nodded, walked forward slowly, like a man with nothing left to lose. But at that moment, Miriam stood up. "I'm a journalist. I've recorded everything." The agent glanced at her, smirking faintly. "Good. But we're not after storytellers." Amanda and Lana watched as Elijah was led away. The young woman bit her lip to hold back tears. Amanda let out a long, steady breath. And inside her, one quiet vow echoed. We will not let him disappear like so many before him. As passengers were escorted off the aircraft, no one was allowed to use phones. No one could film. Security blanketed the terminal, but in the rear galley, Lana stepped out quietly, still holding a tray of tea. Beneath it, the encryption device and the final code. No one stopped her. No one searched her. She was just a flight attendant. If you've read this far and your heart feels as tight as those still on that plane, leave a comment. What do you think will happen to Elijah? And if you believe the truth should never be buried, share this story. Because sometimes, the right story told at the right time, it can change an entire generation. In the back of the military vehicle pulling away from the base, Elijah sat quietly. His hands were not cuffed, but he knew. Where was he going? There would be no return. And yet, he also knew. The truth was no longer in his hands. It was being carried by someone no one would have expected, Lana, the one who used to serve tea, smile politely and stay silent. And that silence today. She was screaming louder than ever with every step she took. The skies above El Paso that day were choked with gray clouds. The sunlight had been strangled by an unusually heavy layer of haze. The runway behind had been sealed, and Flight 918, the Boeing 737, was now towed into a technical zone. No trace remained to suggest that mere hours ago it had carried a passenger powerful enough to shake the hands of government. But what mattered most was no longer on that aircraft. It was nestled in a folded cloth pouch, hidden inside the lining of a young flight attendant's jacket. One who now moved silently through emergency exit 3, heading toward the civilian perimeter of the base's southern sector. Her name was Lana, and from that moment on, she was no longer just the girl who brewed tea, passed out napkins, or bowed with polite apologies. She walked with even steps, not hurried, not slow. And still echoing in her ears was Elijah's raspy voice. Don't bring it where the crowd gathers. Don't hide it like contraband. Take it to the one who dares to speak the truth out loud and isn't afraid of the price. Lana didn't know who that person might be, but she knew one thing. She could not let the device fall into the hands of those who had taken Elijah without a single record of his existence. As she reached a side gate leading to the civilian sector, she encountered a small checkpoint. A young soldier stepped out, half smiling, half suspicious. Your crew from Flight 918? Lana nodded. I've been instructed to collect a missing baggage declaration form for the flight crew, Southern Dispatch Room. The soldier hesitated, then scanned her temporary ID. The gate opened. She slipped through, without looking back. Within 300 meters, Laney ducked into a public restroom beside a closed fast food joint. Inside a stall, she peeled back the lining of her jacket and pulled out the pouch. Her heart was racing faster with every passing second. The device was still there, untouched, uninterfered. She looked at it as if it were alive. No lights, no buttons. But it pulsed with something. It was alive, waiting, and watching her decision. She had no destination, no contact, no internet, no Elijah, no Amanda. But she remembered. One person, the reporter, Miriam Joss. Miriam was at the Golden Square Hotel, just 15 minutes away by taxi. Her room door was knocked on 3 times. Then silence. She opened it. And there stood Lana, eyes wide, as if she had just run from an explosion that left no smoke. "You brought it?" Lana didn't answer. She stepped inside, sat down, opened the pouch, placed the device on the table. "He handed it to me. And then they took him." Miriam didn't touch it. She opened her laptop and launched encryption software. Initiated a wireless handshake. A soft green light blinked. The device recognized the signal. No response at first. But after a few seconds, a screen appeared. Mirror dust. Part 2. Access locked decryption code. Required Lana pulled a folded piece of paper from her wallet, Elijah's handwritten note, and handed it to Miriam. Within 3 minutes, part of the contents began to surface. An audio recording of a high-level meeting from 2007 between a Department of Defense representative, a CIA director, and 2 U.S. senators. The voices echoed into the room. If the witnesses remain alive, the Shadowlight investigation will be reopened. Then erase them. Who signs? No one. We just lose the trail. Like always. Lana's skin crawled. She shivered, her fingers gripping the edge of her chair. "Oh my God. They really—" Miriam shook her head. "Number. They didn't erase. They had others do it." They issued silence. A sudden knock at the door. Both women jumped to their feet. "Who is it?" Miriam called. "Hotel management. Someone left luggage in the lobby." Lana looked at Miriam. They both knew. No one forgot anything. They were being watched. Miriam stuffed the device and her laptop into a bag and handed them to Lana. "Exit through the fire stairs. Take the stairwell, not the elevator." "What about you?" Miriam looked her in the eyes, steady, burning. "I've been doing this for nearly 30 years. I've been detained, threatened, and chased, but I've never run. You, on the other hand, you're holding what I've searched for all my life." Lana hesitated, but Miriam's gaze left her no room to debate. She sprinted down the stairwell, 3 floors, then out into the streets of El Paso. Faded streetlights, dusty wind, and car horns that seemed to come from nowhere. She ducked into a small bookstore, slipped through a side alley, past rows of bicycles, and entered a corner cafe. Inside, an old public landline phone still hung on the wall. No one paid her any mind. She dialed. 1 ring. Then a voice. Male. Steady. "We're listening." Cut to a darkened room on the outskirts of D.C. A man in a white shirt sits beneath the seal of the International Witness Protection Organization. He hangs up, turns to a woman beside him, her hair silver, her eyes steel. She has the device. The woman didn't speak, just nodded. "Bring her in. Full protection. All hotel cameras just went dark for 90 seconds. We have 1 shot." On the road, Lana had no idea where she was going. Only one thing was certain. She remembered Elijah's words. "You don't need to be a hero, just don't bow your head." And that's exactly what she was doing. Even as her legs began to tremble, even as the wind whipped dust into her eyes, even as the path ahead blurred into a world that had long grown used to burying truth. Lana, once a quiet figure behind the curtains of history. He was now stepping onto center stage, and for the first time in her life, she knew with absolute clarity, if she stopped now, there would be no one left to carry the truth forward. The night air in El Paso was still warm, but Lana felt frozen. Her hands clutched the canvas pouch tightly against her chest, as if she were holding on to the last pulse of life. She had run across 2 city blocks, turned at 3 intersections, and finally arrived at the second rendezvous point given over the phone. An old watch repair shop with fogged glass windows and a faded closed sign. The door opened on its own as she approached. No one outside saw her vanish. Inside, the store was pitch black. But behind a row of dusty display cases, a back door swung open. 2 figures waited, a silver-haired woman and a middle-aged man. "Lana," the woman spoke. Her voice was low and steady. "We're part of an independent civilian security team, operating under the protection of an international human rights coalition. You are safe." "I don't need protection," Lana panted. "I need a place to release this." The man stepped forward. "Where's the device?" Lana gripped the pouch tightly. "Before I hand it over, I need to know the people you work for. Do they want the truth, or just an edited version of it?" The woman hesitated, then answered, "That depends on what the truth is." In a reinforced basement, its walls layered with concrete and lined with lead for anti-surveillance, Lana placed the device on the table. No password was needed anymore. After 72 hours untouched, the biometric lock had auto-unlocked the remaining partition. A large screen lit up. The message appeared. Part 3. Classified data warning. Contains names of currently elected officials, journalists, and private operatives. Proceed with caution. Lana inhaled deeply. She pressed the button. The data began to flood the screen. First, a list of intergovernmental wire transfers. Funding channels for Operation Shadow Light traced to covert military budgets. Then, names. Real names. Of people labeled disappeared during operations, among them someone related to Amanda Blake. Lana gripped the armrest. These people, many of them, didn't deserve to die. Some were whistleblowers, bodyguards, even the internal documentation staff, but they were lumped into the termination list, without trial, without recourse. At the end of the list, a name hit Lana like a bullet. Jessica Ford, daughter of Elijah Ford. Used as leverage to force Elijah to halt internal investigations. When he refused, she was placed under risk supervision. Missing since 2013, Elijah had never mentioned a daughter. Lana cradled her head. She felt like she had stepped into a labyrinth with no exit. The deeper she went, the darker it got. The silver-haired woman studied her expression, then said softly, "Now you understand why he never sent this part. He knew. This isn't just an accusation. It's a death sentence for innocent people swept up in it." Lana said nothing. Her breathing quickened. "So what do I do?" "You have 3 choices," the man replied. 1. Send the entire data set to a major global outlet. Full disclosure. 2. Send only the first part. Enough to make noise, but not inflict unnecessary damage. 3. Erase it all. Lana stood, paced the room once, twice. "If I choose one, people like Jessica, innocent names, will be exposed, unearthed, even if they're already gone or still running. But if I choose 2, I become the one curating the truth. And if I choose 3, I'm just another silent accomplice." She turned to the screen. The list kept scrolling, line by line, file by file, not just data. Fates. The silver-haired woman said gently, "Elijah gave you this choice because he no longer had the strength to carry it. You are not his replacement. You are the torch he chose to pass forward. Lana sat back down, placed her hand on the device. For the first time it felt warm, as if something inside was beating. She tapped it 3 times. A confirmation prompt appeared. Confirm data handling method. What do you mean? Full release. Partial disclosure. Erase all. She hovered over option 2, partial disclosure, but didn't press it. She froze, then slowly pulled her hand back, looked up. I need 1 more hour. To do what? The man asked. Lana stared straight ahead. To read. Not to choose. To understand. How it is revealed defines justice. In that dim blue-lit room, a young flight attendant, no title, no fortune, no formal training, was preparing to redefine what it meant to be a citizen in an age of control. No one outside knew her name, but tomorrow, if she chose to release it, the world would face a question she had lived with for 24 hours straight. Do we have the courage to face the truth, even when it exposes ourselves? 3 days after Mirror Dust went public, the world changed, but not in the way anyone expected. There were no armored trucks storming capitals. No government officials were dragged away in handcuffs. No blockbuster headlines resembling action films. Instead, there was silence. Long, deep, heavy silence. The silence of those in high places who could no longer explain why their names were on the list. The silence of those who had survived by never speaking, now forced to say something. And the silence of citizens who had never believed they had the right to ask, who holds power? Perhaps the most unsettling part of Mirror Dust wasn't the list of wrongdoers, but the final segment in Elijah's data. 13 individuals who blocked the truth for 17 years. Global news outlets hunted them down. 12 names were confirmed. But the 13th remained blank, and the only person who knew the identity of the 14th was Lana. On the 4th day, Lana made her first public appearance, not in a government hall, not on national television, but in a small public library in Virginia. 37 seats, 3 cameras, and a row of high school students. Agnes stood behind her, silent. Lana stepped to the podium. No blinding lights, no media buzz, only eyes. Waiting. Not skeptical, not expectant, just quietly ready. She brought no devices, no documents, only a folded slip of paper in her pocket. I'm not here to talk about what happened, she began. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear. You've all read it. You know what Mirror Dust contains. You know where it came from. You know it exposed things we thought were impossible to expose. She paused. The air felt frozen. I'm here to talk about what wasn't in the data, the part no line of code captured, no file stored, no journalist asked about. The part called choice. Lana unfolded the paper. Inside, only one line in shaky handwriting. The 14th is me, Elijah Ford. Elijah knew he had been part of the system, had erased, had protected, had stayed silent. And he didn't blame the system. He didn't paint himself a hero either. He left just one line. I don't deserve to stand beside those erased from history, but I can do one last thing. Keep them from being erased again. A girl in the front row, pigtails tight, raised her hand. Do you forgive him? Lana was quiet for a few seconds. I don't think forgiveness is what's needed here. I think when someone acknowledges they were part of the problem and acts to become part of the solution, then that act, it is the best apology possible. After the talk, there was no long applause, no media interviews, only a quiet line of people, not seeking autographs, but to say thank you. An elderly woman trembled as she held Lana's hand. You did what my generation should have done 30 years ago. A boy with curly hair whispered, I didn't understand the whole story, but I think someone had to be brave like you. That evening, Lana left through the back of the library. No security escort, no flashing lights. She wore a baseball cap and walked the street like any other person, and she liked it that way. She stopped at a small cafe. The owner recognized her but said nothing. Only placed a cup of ginger tea on the table. Free of charge. She sipped slowly. On the wall, a muted TV displayed breaking news. The Department of Defense has issued a statement. A special independent committee will be formed to investigate incidents connected to the Mirror Dust archive. For the first time, previously erased documents will be restored and reviewed before the public. Lana didn't smile. She knew it wasn't justice yet, but it was a start. A week later, the International Human Rights Council invited her to speak at a forum as an advisor. She declined. "I don't want to be a symbol. I want the next voice to be their own. The person reading, the person is angry, the person is hurting. They don't need someone to lead them anymore." Agnes asked, "So what will you do?" Lana shrugged. "I'm going back to fly." And she did. A month later, she appeared on Flight 218, Boston to Seattle. In uniform, serving drinks like history hadn't swept her into the storm. But one passenger later recalled, "She didn't just serve drinks. She looked at everyone like she was asking, 'Do you know you're worthy?' And that alone made me lift my head for the first time in my life." In a small house near the coast, Agnes received a package, no return address. Inside, a handwritten note, "Thank you for keeping me awake." Dell, and a small encrypted hard drive labeled "Mirror Dust Backup Copy for when history repeats itself." Agnes locked it in a safe. No one knew where it was. But Agnes knew one thing. If the world ever tried to forget again, the next generation would remember. Somewhere unknown, in an unnamed cell, Elijah Ford sat gazing through a slit of morning light. He smiled, not waiting for rescue, because he knew the truth had gotten out, and the one who carried it was someone the world had never noticed. This is the end of the story, but the beginning of a new chapter, a world where the last silent voice has finally spoken. And the truth at last has a face, not a file, but a person. Her name is Lana. Story message. The truth doesn't have to be perfect to be worth telling. In a world where power is often built on silence and careers preserved by forgetting, the story of Elijah and Lana reminds us, truth is not a weapon. It's light. It doesn't destroy systems. It forces them to see themselves. Elijah remained silent for decades, but he understood. If he died with the secret, generations would be forced to live in that same darkness. And so he didn't choose someone powerful. He chose someone ordinary with a conscience, Lana, to bring truth into the light. Lana didn't fight with a gun. She had no title, no influence, no protection. But in a single defining moment, when faced with the choice to speak or stay silent, she chose courage. And that changed the world. Justice is not some grand decree passed in a parliament. Justice begins when one ordinary person, in an unexpected moment, chooses not to look away. Real life lessons to take away. No one is too small to make a difference. Lana started as a flight attendant. No authority, no fame, no one expecting anything of her. But in the end, she was the only one who dared to do what more powerful people had avoided for decades. In real life, many wrongs persist because bystanders think they're not important enough to intervene, but it's often the ones who seem invisible who change the game. Silence in the face of wrongdoing is still a choice. Silence is never neutral. It's either complicity or the refusal to be brave. From governments and corporations to workplaces and families, so much harm survives because those nearby don't speak up. No truth is ever too late to reveal. Elijah seemed like a relic of the past. He had once been part of the problem, but he knew, no one is absolved just because time has passed. Time doesn't cleanse wrongdoing, but the courage to face the truth, even late. It's the only path toward a future that deserves saving. Truth doesn't need to be edited to be acceptable. Lana was forced to choose: reveal everything, or shield the parts that might hurt. In the end, she realized, truth has no draft version. It doesn't need to be softened to fit our comfort. It needs to be respected in its raw, whole form. The more we curate or filter the truth, the more we strip it of its power and become a new version of the very people who hid it in the first place. When a generation rises, darkness loses its grip. Lana's speech in that quiet library didn't cause a media frenzy. There was no thunderous applause, but it awakened something. A generation waiting for proof that truth could be defended without hiding behind it. We don't need leaders to do what's right. We just need enough people to say, "I will not stay silent." Closing thought. Mirror dust wasn't just a data leak. It was history's whisper. If you don't stand, no one will remember those who were erased. And Lana, a flight attendant whose name no one remembered at first, became the voice that made the whole world remember.